Hi, everybody. So we are starting your papers this week, and I just wanted to go over some kind of basic ideas about writing as process and product, which is certainly a way of thinking about writing through composition studies, but in a more pedagogical, hopefully straightforward approach. So here we go. So thinking about writing as a product means thinking about genres. Genres are forms of writing. One of the best ways, of course, to understand expectations for any type of writing is to read examples of that genre. Ray and Wallace, for example, explain how critical reading of academic writing can lead to better scholarly writing. It's the same kind of modeling we use with our students in all subjects of teaching, right? So look at this. This is a good example. Follow it. In that way, writing is a product, right? And that's kind of what we're doing when I ask you to look at articles and projects that are published, right? But producing strong writing is, of course, more than just copying form. So understanding expectations is just part of the process of any good writing. So the shift to process in composition began in the late 60s, really evolved in the 70s and 80s, and now is kind of the standard of one of the things we talk about when we talk about teaching writing. And the idea is, of course, if you think about something as a process, it becomes less overwhelming and something you can complete. If I tell you to go home and bake a cake, well, some of you have never baked a cake before. You know what a cake looks like, but you don't know how to get from raw ingredients into something that is baked and decorated and beautiful and tastes great, right? The same idea is true for people who are not writers, right? So people who are not trained to be writers. Right? You say, here's a bunch of words, now go home and take your ideas and shape them into some brilliant piece of writing that somebody would want to read. But if you think about writing as a process, right, a series of steps like a recipe that you can actually go through to create something, then you might come up with different cakes, right? Different ingredients, different cakes, different processes, different quality of cakes, but it makes it a more manageable task, right? So it also makes it more realistic because, of course, nobody just pops out a perfect essay or article or seminar paper or project. So we all follow processes all the time. It might just be like sitting down and thinking. You maybe make notes. You might make outlines. And experience tells me, and research tells us, that writers who experience writing problems usually fail to utilize an adequate writing process. So if you're one of those people who struggles writing something like a seminar paper, a mid-length but longer than undergraduate kind of piece of writing, then perhaps one way you can make that easier for yourself or make you better at it is to adjust your writing process. So we'll talk about some effective techniques you might use to improve your writing process and your writing in general. So the process generally is broken into 3 parts. Some people do 5 parts, 7 parts, but I just think there's basically these 3 ideas, or things you kind of do before you start writing out your ideas. There's the actual process of putting those ideas into some form, and that's drafting, right? And then there's a period where we're working on the things that have been written to make them better, and that might be called revising. Now, all these 3 tasks don't necessarily happen in that order, right? Just first pre-writing, then drafting, then revising. They also can oftentimes overlap, so that as you are thinking of ideas, you might jot down and come up with like the perfect sentence that later is part of your draft. Or as you're revising, you may realize that you're missing a whole section that you need to discuss, and you have to go back and kind of think about and plan out what that's going to look like. So there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of out of order kind of wrapping around with it. But the idea is there are the kind of 3 ways we can think about our process. Our process consists of things we can do to get our ideas ready to put it into writing, the actual writing of it, and then the improving of that writing once it's kind of out there. So we think about pre-writing. I'm going to just talk about a couple of ways you can invent ideas, kind of getting started. In this case, invention in rhetoric doesn't mean you're kind of coming up with magical ideas out of the air. Just as invention in science doesn't really mean that. What it means is that you're kind of generating ideas based on what you've experienced or what you know or what you've researched. There's 4 basic ways that I'm going to talk about pre-writing: thinking, researching, writing, and organizing. So obviously, a big part of things you do before you write is you think, like, what are my thoughts, and what do I want to write about? What do I want to spend my time doing? So when you first sit down to write your essay, you think about, well, what's my topic? What do I want to write? What do I want to write about? What do I already know about it? What I need to find out about it? Your purpose, kind of why are you writing it? What's your goal? A lot of times, well, we start with a problem we want to answer, and our purpose is answering that question or answering that problem. Audience, for whom are you writing? Who will read it? Right? Context, how does this topic relate to the current environment? Right? A paper on Shakespeare might look very different today than it did in the 1950s because of changes in our own society, right? Style, what language choices are most effective, right? What's your style when you're writing? Keeping these things in mind will help you think about the rhetorical situation of whatever you're writing about. Think about pre-writing as researching. So one way we come up with ideas is we look at what other people have done. So reading examples of the kinds of writing we'll do can serve as models. Reading research related to your topic can help you understand context and develop your own ideas in relation to the related conversation on that topic. And conducting your own research, of course, can also help you test your ideas. Not all writing obviously requires research, but all writing can benefit from a better understanding of the topic and the discourse community involved. So when you're writing about technology, you're certainly not the first person to have written about these different technologies. In the way that you can find out what other people have done is to go out and do some kind of library or archival research. If you have ideas that you want to test in the classroom, a great way to do that is to actually run a study. That's a form of research as well. All of our ideas happen within the context of our discourse community. And so who else is talking about and doing the kind of work that you're interested in doing, and how can you find out about that? Think about writing. You might think of lots of different kind of heuristics or processes or tools you can employ to generate ideas. You'll find ways to both develop a topic or to limit and organize your topic. Here are some writing strategies: free writing, listing, and clustering. Free writing is basically the idea that you're just going to write whatever's on your mind. You're going to set up a certain amount of time and just sit there and write whatever comes to mind about the topic, and kind of flows naturally out of you thinking about the topic. You might end up with a giant paragraph of mush that has one great idea in there, or you might end up with something that becomes kind of your first draft of your paper. It depends how far along your thoughts and your research have gotten at that point. I like to free write at the beginning of projects for 10 or 15 minutes and just try to not stop writing, just make myself write. But not to overdo it, right? Because you don't have to get to all your ideas there. And then kind of take a break, come back and look at it, and kind of pick out the material that I find useful. Just a way to kind of generate thoughts I might not have had otherwise. Listing is similar, but you don't have to kind of put that pressure of yourself of like a timed writing experience. You can just kind of list out ideas. You also can avoid the feeling like you have to write complete sentences or paragraphs because it's a list and it's just kind of jotting down. And then you can go back and look at that list and kind of see how these different ideas might relate. So think about when you're writing a grocery list, you might reorganize that list to make it more efficient going through the store, right? All the things that are in dairy and eggs and yogurts and all those things might go together, and then soft drinks, and then lunch meat or whatever, right? However your store is organized. The same thing is true of your ideas. You can kind of take them and say, well, this seems to be a theme I can find here and a theme I can find here. And these are your ideas kind of coming together. Clustering does a similar thing, except for it's more visual. So you draw a circle in the center of your paper and put your topic there, and then kind of explore different ideas about that topic, like a spider web kind of growing out of that and drawing connections between your ideas. And that works, I think, really well for people who are visually oriented and like to see their ideas kind of spread out on a page. Pre-writing as organizing is something that I use a lot. Of course, organization for any piece of writing is dependent on the rhetorical situation. You should know, what you're expected to write. So what does an academic article look like, or what does a digital project look like? And that might then set up kind of a system. So everything I do has to have an introduction, and I probably need to have some kind of literature review. I need to to say kind of what I did in my studies. Maybe I need a methods section, or I need a results section, discussion section. Or if it's a whole different kind of project, right? Maybe I need to have an introduction to kind of set up what my project was going to be. Kind of here are the results of my project, like what my students did in class, and here's basically the discussion of what that looks like based on the theoretical framework I set up in my introduction. And so, different organizations may cause you to come up with different ways of organizing your thoughts. But I often teach my class that it's easy if you can kind of, if you're not an organic writer, somebody who writing comes easily and just kind of flows out of, you might be a structural writer, which says like you need to have a thesis and a topic sentence, topic sentence, topic sentence. Each topic sentence needs to have an example, and that example needs to be discussed, and that discussion needs to have a conclusion. That conclusion needs to lead in your next idea, right? So you have your transition. You can do the same thing for an academic paper, right? How many paragraphs do I need to do this? How many paragraphs do I need to do that? What are the big things I need to hit? And that kind of, what it'll do is kind of help you think about ideas that might fit in each section, but also help you find gaps in what you need to find out in order to fill in that outline. I like to call the second part of the writing process drafting, because drafting feels like it's a continual process, right? An architect uses drafting to perfect his or her design, or a technical drawer. The idea is like you can always erase and kind of move things around, right? We put a wall here. No, we need it 5 feet back. Well, that changes a bunch of other things in that blueprint. The same thing is true in your drafts. So if you think about your drafts, you can have lots of drafts, right? But there's 3 basic kinds of drafts: rough drafts, which are kind of for you. Review drafts, which you might feel like are fairly finished, or to a point where it's worth getting somebody else's feedback, or maybe at least setting it aside and giving yourself some time before you come back and review it. And then, of course, the final draft, which is the one that you're going to submit to me in this class, or the one you might submit for publication. And it's not a final draft in the sense that you're completely done with it, but it's maybe as good as it can get under just your control. And so it's turning it over to some kind of publication or review, like professional review process. So think about the rough draft. It could be your first attempt to kind of complete a piece or a section of a larger work. If you're following an outline, you're just filling in support into that outline. If you are maybe just free writing a section at a time, right? This is just getting all your ideas out on the page. And once they're on the page, the great thing about writing is it allows you to go back and review and make it better. Or when you're speaking, once you say it, it's out there. When you're writing, you can shift those things around, make changes as you see fit. Review drafts are kind of the best draft you can make by fixing your rough draft, right? So obviously the kinds of mistakes you might have in a really rough draft are fairly obvious. And a lot of times they're even just surface level errors, right, to make it readable. And peer review is one of those common ways in which we work with other people, collaborate on our own writing. So you find people who are your peers, people basically on your same level, or people who can bring a particular kind of reading skill to your paper and ask them for their feedback. You might ask somebody, for example, who doesn't know anything about your topic but is a good writer, right, to give you feedback on the writing of it. You might ask somebody who's a content expert to give you feedback on the ideas, to see if you kind of overlooked anything. Academic peer review is the next step in that. That's when you submit something for presentation or publication, and people are judging whether it's going to fit into what they want to do in their publication, and might give you additional things to review and work on in your own writing. At its most basic, you should at least be able to have a kind of finished feeling draft that you're going to give one more really close run through to make sure before you're actually given to somebody for kind of publication, right? So the result of this writing should be the best possible text you can create in the time allowed. Obviously, during the semester, it's a shorter time period. I know people who take 2 to 3 years to write an academic article, depending on your field and the amount of research and work that's involved in completing that project, right? But in this case, you have half a semester to crank something out. So just be aware that when I get your paper, I know that it's a product of the time you've had to spend on it, and I will give you feedback so that you can make it stronger for the future. Just as editors might give you comments before publication, or even if they're not going to publish it, and say, well, these are some things you could improve if you were looking for another home for it, right? Revising is what that commentary looks like, and of course you can review and edit and proofread your own work, and you should, and you can ask peer reviewers to do the same before it gets to me. Reviewing is very simply looking at kind of the general holistic feeling, like is your writing doing what you wanted it to do, right? Does your writing achieve your purpose? Is it going to meet audience expectations? Does it consider the context of the conversation? Does it fit into a genre and meet those expectations? Does my writing style present my character effectively? In other words, does it sound like me? Or is there anything missing or lacking that I need to address? Editing then might be looking more carefully at the content of your essay, its organization, and the usefulness of all your material. So does my writing begin in a way that is understandable to the audience given the context, right? You have to have an introduction section, right? Whether that's one paragraph, whether that's a whole chapter in a book, you need to set up your work to give context to the audience. Does my writing focus on a clear purpose or purposes, right? Is it clear what I'm trying to accomplish here? Does each section of my text build toward that purpose? Is there anything that's extraneous that I just kind of threw in there thinking I was going to make that connection, and now that I've finished writing the whole thing, that's no longer necessary? I can yank that out. Is my writing situated in the context of the topic and the audience? In other words, is the work I'm doing clearly connected to the conversations that are happening in the field? Are my ideas connected smoothly and logically to one another, right? Am I providing transitions for my readers so they can follow my train of thought? Are there any unsupported statements in my writing? A lot of times we have ideas as we're writing, we kind of pop it in, like this is something I believe to be true, or this is a conclusion I would like to make, but we don't go back in there and make sure that the conclusions and ideas we present are always being evidenced. And that's a big part of academic writing, right? You can't just say what you think. You have to say how you got to that thought, right? What evidence and rational thought are you using to get there? Is there any unrelated information in my writing? Do any points need more evidence? Are there any confusing ideas or statements in my essay? And that's definitely something that having a peer reviewer edit your work can really help you, right? If they're like, wait, I don't know how you got here, or what do you mean by this? You know there's a parts you need to adjust in your rewriting. Revising, you might call proofreading or copy editing, right? So looking at individual sentences and words and considering the format of your essay. In other words, does your text look like it should? Is it easy to read mechanically? Spelling is correct. Here it says APA format. You might use MLA format or Chicago style, whatever is relevant to your field that you're writing in. Computers composition, it really depends if you publish in education fields or you publish in composition fields, and even by different journals, what expectations might be. And I'm fine with any of those formats as long as you use that format consistently and correctly, right? A lot of my work is in APA because I write a lot for education journals. Remember the spelling and grammar checkers, while helpful, are not always correct. Just like word processing programs underline things that aren't always things you need to change, and citation machines can make mistakes because they're only as good as the information you provide them. Careful proofreading, of course, adds to your ethos as a writer, like dressing up for a job interview, right? You don't show up for a job interview in cut-off jeans and a stained T-shirt, right? You show up looking the part. So if your job interview is, for a university professor job, you're probably wearing business casual. If you're going to be a lawyer, you're probably wearing a really sharp suit of some kind. If you're going to be a waiter, you still want to look clean and neat in your appearance, even if you're not going to wear a suit or a tie or something like that, okay? If you have any questions about any of these things, please email me. I'm here to help. Thanks.